Right, so now we have the capability of creating brand new users, right? The next thing would be that we would like to be able to update existing users, right? For instance, adding the first name, last name, any email, or date of birth, and so on and so forth, right? So to do that, we would have an event handler for the update, which I'm not sure if we had started it with the controller. Right, so let's look at the profile controllers to see if we had gotten that started. So let's go into the user and the user profile controller. We have an update user, and that update user presumably does update the user. Okay, but it's probably using the local array for that in the user service in the client. Let's step through it. Let's see if that's the case. If we have the if we take a look at the profile controller, we could put a breakpoint in the update. So let's go in the update. Let's put a breakpoint right there. So if we change this to PO and we do update, indeed we are going in there. If we navigate in there, looks like that is not actually implemented on the service. Okay, so it looks like the service never implemented this. Okay, so let's go into the service to do that. Update user. Let's see. It's there. Looks like it's there. Why did it not? Why did it not? Okay, let's see. Let's do the breakpoint again. Let's try it again. Wait, update user, user ID. Update. Let's see. User's undefined. Ooh, okay. How come that is undefined? User is undefined. Okay, so that's something else. Okay, so that user when it gets here is undefined. So let's look at the template, see what it's sending us. We have on the update. On the update, we're actually not passing anything. That's why it's undefined. It should pass what? Model.user. Let's pass in that. There it is. Let's try it again. Let's refresh. There's PO still logged in. Let's pass in and click on update. Okay, now we have a user. There it is with an ID. We can go in there. Now it's going to look up for that in the array of the local array. We want to modify this so that this is on the server side. So let's stop this. Let's refresh. So let's on the client side, we have logic for updating the user. We want to move this over to the server. Okay. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to first create a URL, and the URL will be /API/user. And here we're going to follow here with the ID of the user. The ID of the user. Because we're going to filter and say that we don't want to deal with all the users. We want to deal with this particular user. Okay, and you might ask, well, why don't we instead use what we have been we're following the pattern of putting everything in the we have been using this pattern, right, of using the query string as opposed to passing it as a part of the parameter of the path. You see that, right? Well, because this is another convention in the RESTful API conventions, right? Is that this path right here, if you're not passing any filters or if you're not passing any IDs, okay, you must be referring to all the users, right? All the collections, all the instances of that particular collection, right? All the collection of users. Yes? No filters means you mean all of them, right? And we looked at on Monday, right? Being able to retrieve all the users. Now, whether that's a valid use case, well, it depends. Who might want to see the list of all the users? Probably an administrator wants to see a list of all the users. Probably not everybody should be allowed to do that. Yes, but nevertheless, it's a valid use case. Looking at the list of all the users. Yes. Now, that same convention of RESTful API convention is that if you want to refer to one specific instance of a user, then you would provide the unique identifier of that user as part of the path. Okay, again, it's a convention, right? And it'll make sense a little later when we talk about hierarchies of nested data models, right? We'll talk about that a little later. So if you're specifying one single user, typically it'll be using the unique identifier for that particular user, right? If you're filtering on other attributes such as age, gender, or salary, or any of the other attributes that is not a unique identifier, okay, then those you should use the query parameters for those, right? In that query parameters, you could put, I want to know users that make between 100,000 and 200,000, right? So you put, as part of the query parameter, something like minimum salary, maximum salary, yes? And those would be used for filtering, right, and retrieving a subset of all the users that match that criteria. Make sense? So if you're doing queries for criteria, general criteria, you would use query parameters. If you're retrieving an element that that this element exists in the database and it has a unique identifier by a primary key, that primary key would be part of the path, not part of the query parameter. That makes sense? Right? And again, the reason why you do one or the other will become apparent a little later. Right? We'll come back to that a little later. So we're going to be using a path parameter here to identify the user that we want to update. So we are referring to that one user, and so we want to generate an HTTP request that is going to modify that particular instance. Okay? So we're using get to read. We're using post to create new instances. Yes? Here we're going to be modifying an existing instance. Right? So we're not going to use get. We're not going to use post. Instead, we're going to use put. Put, again, by convention, is used to modify existing instances. All right? So it's put, and you use the URL of that specifically identifies the instance that you're modifying, and you provide the new data. Okay? The new data, and we're going to do a return here. So we're going to do a return. This is now, we're going to move that over to the server. We'll move that over to the server. So on the server side, if we go back to the server side, on the app, we need to listen for that incoming put request. Put, right? And this is the URL. It's the same URL over here, right? But followed by a placeholder that's going to hold the ID, the unique identifier. I'm going to call it the same thing I called it on the client side. And the function that's going to handle it is I'm going to follow the same naming convention as the client side. And implement it here with a request and a response. We need to retrieve that user ID from the parameter. Right? These parameters, the ones that are in the query, right, and we retrieve using query, right, we call them query parameters. Right? So username and password are query parameters, everything that follows the question mark. These parameters is not part of the query, right? Instead, is part of the path itself. Okay? So we refer to these as path parameters as opposed to as query parameters. Make sense? And I believe there's a quiz question on this, distinguishing what's what and what do you call this or that or the other. So these are path parameters that are part of the path. So we're going to retrieve it. And again, where is this coming from? From the request, right? So you're going to find it in the request. And so this is a parameter. So this is not in the query, it's in the parameters. And the parameter name is user ID. Okay? I think it's params. I forget if it's plural or singular. There it is. So we have user ID. What do? Once we have that user ID, we're going to use this for loop, right, that we had on the client side to look up for that user, for that user ID. We're going to iterate over the users. Once we find it, we're going to send them back. We're going to send. We're going to say a response.send. Now this send, typically we would just say send. Wait, what's user? User is this is the user in the body, right? That's coming from the client side. Right, when you retrieve that as well, user is in the body, request.body. Right? We're sending the new user with the new first name, new last name, new everything, right? It's coming along. We retrieve it, we're going to put it in the array, and then we're just going to send out back the user, or just if we didn't find it, we can send back maybe a status 404. We can send back a 404. We didn't find it, right? We were trying to change that user, but that user didn't exist. That ID didn't exist. You're trying to modify a user that doesn't exist, we'll send you back an error message saying 404, we didn't find the user. Typically 404s are, I didn't find a page, right? But this has the same exact meaning, meaning the resource that you were looking for didn't exist. That resource typically has been just pages. But this is another resource, right? A record in a database, in a table, is just like any other resource, right? So we didn't find it. We sent back a 404. So if we restart this and come back to the profile, okay, PO doesn't exist anymore, right? Because we restart the server, right? So we would need to log out and register again. So let's register with PO. And there's PO. And we can change these PO Dameron? Is that how you spell it? PO Dameron? And we're going to do an update. So it went out and it did an update. It went back. Let's refresh. And indeed, it was refreshed, right? Notice that the server did refresh the data back on the server. Make sense? Everybody okay? All right.